Picture the Atlantic at night, cold wind ripping off the ocean, spray turning to needles, and a black, jagged coast that looks like it was designed by an engineer who hated amphibious landings. Far inland, rivers cut horizontal scars through hills and ridgelines, channeling anything that moves into narrow crossings and ancient choke points. And at the western edge of Europe, a country the size of Indiana squares its shoulders like a heavyweight, stone towns stacked on hillsides, cliffs that punch straight out of the sea, and a military small enough to be underestimated, until it isn't. You want the TLDR? Invading Portugal isn't a plan. It's a cautionary tale. Every ambitious empire on the Iberian Peninsula has learned this the hard way. In the 14th century, Castile marched in and got introduced to the Portuguese national sport, not losing. In the Peninsular War, Napoleon sent in marshals with glittering reputations and found his path to Lisbon blocked by a ghost network of earthen forts built in secret, linked by signal posts, trenches, and roads that all funneled into a single conclusion: none. Even World War II planners gave Portugal a pass, and that was on a continent where everyone else got dragged to the dance. Today, factor in NATO, modern sensors, submarines, and a coastline that eats landing craft for breakfast, and you begin to see why any invasion plan dissolves on contact with reality, like a pastel de nata left out in the rain. And yes, that's a crime. Let's start with the map, because maps bully strategy. Portugal is a wall at Europe's edge, 800 plus kilometers of Atlantic coastline girded by headlands, surf, and very few beaches that an opposed landing force could actually use. The really nice beaches are tourist perfect for a reason. They're boxed in by cliffs, overlooked by high ground, and exposed to swell that can flip a 30-ton vehicle like a waiter flipping an omelette. The ports that matter, Lisbon on the Tagus, Sines down the coast, Leixões for Porto, are kill boxes if defended. Approaches narrow into channels bracketed by batteries, hills, and urban skylines, where every roofline becomes a firing position. A modern amphibious assault would either have to seize a port intact, good luck with that, or spend days building a temporary one while under fire from artillery, drones, and submarines that don't need to get close to be lethal. Now look east. The land route to Portugal runs through Spain. Not neutral Spain, NATO Spain. Before your hypothetical invader even reaches the border, they've already triggered collective defense and turned a Portuguese problem into a transatlantic one. The Luso-Spanish frontier is long and deceptive. Open plains in the south, hard folded terrain in the north, with the Douro, Tagus, and Guadiana rivers slicing westward toward the sea. Those rivers aren't just pretty, they're obstacles. Bridges are few and obvious, fords seasonal, and once you punch through to the interior, you discover why the phrase interior lines sounds so smug when Portuguese staff officers say it. From Coimbra down to Évora, defenders can move laterally on better roads and shorter distances than any invader creeping along, lengthening supply lines. If you're attacking, you're always a ridge and a river behind. Layer on weather. The ocean doesn't care about your operation name. Winter Atlantic storms shut down fragile timelines, and even summer brings persistent wind and swell that complicate landing windows and drone operations. Fog hands defenders free concealment. Meanwhile, heat and dryness inland turn brush into tinder, and a defender willing to scorch the earth, as they did for Wellington, can make movement a slow-motion nightmare. It's hard to blitzkrieg when the hills are on fire and the next water crossing is mined, observed, and zeroed. But geography is just the first boss. The second is history, and history here is mean. The lines of Torres Vedras, those secret forts thrown up in 1810, are long gone as earthworks, but not as a concept. Portugal learned the value of defense in depth, denial of resources, and the right kind of asymmetry. That culture filtered down the centuries into a doctrine built around delay, canalization, and the art of making the enemy feel like a tourist who rented a stick shift in Lisbon rush hour. Every road in looks obvious. Every road in is watched. Modern Portugal's armed forces aren't enormous, but they're professional, expeditionary seasoned, and wired into NATO's nervous system. The army's backbone is light and mechanized infantry, adapted to operate in rugged terrain, with elite units, commandos, paratroopers, special operations troops, trained to fight dirty and appear where they shouldn't. The Navy is compact but nasty. Frigates to screen the coast, patrol vessels for maritime interdiction, and the real party crashers, air-independent propulsion submarines that can sit silent off your staging area and turn your amphibious rehearsal into a very expensive diving lesson. The Fuzileiros, Portugal's Marines, specialize in the kind of coastal denial that makes landing craft second-guess their life choices. The Air Force fields multi-role fighters for air policing and interception, transport and surveillance assets for the endless coastline, and enough command and control connectivity with allies that Portuguese air picture is only ever a phone call away from being NATO air picture. Then there are the islands. The Azores and Madeira are not scenic footnotes. They're unsinkable platforms, projecting surveillance and reach into the Atlantic sea lanes. The Azores in particular sit like a geopolitical speed bump in mid-ocean. In peacetime, they're a logistics node. In crisis, they become a tripwire for any force trying to sneak around Europe's western flank. If you're invading from the sea, you're radiating intent for thousands of nautical miles. Someone is listening, and the someone is not just Portugal. Urban terrain. Lisbon and Porto are case studies in how to ruin an invader's day. Lisbon is a bowl of hills wrapped around a river mouth, a tight weave of medieval streets and modern avenues where an attacker either bogs down going block to block or tries to bypass and gets caught in interlocking fields of fire from neighborhoods with names that all mean uphill. The bridges over the Tagus, Vasco da Gama, and 25 de Abril are lifelines in peacetime and liabilities in war. They can be denied, rigged, or simply made irrelevant with mines and riverine patrols. Porto has its own set of steel and granite choke points straddling the Douro. If you're an invader, you'll be staring at spans, calculating blast patterns, and realizing that your timetable is now entirely at the mercy of whoever owns the far bank. Want more bad news? Portugal's civil forces are built to slot into defense at a moment's notice. The National Republican Guard, GNR, rural and gendarmerie style, is a national response tool that knows every back road and village contact. The Public Security Police, PSP, handle urban order and know the cities better than any map app ever will. In a crisis, those forces become light infantry and counter-sabotage, rolling checkpoints and human ISR. Imagine trying to move covertly when every cafe owner can describe your accent and your rental car's dent to a patrol that arrives 2 minutes later. Good luck ghosting the nation that invented the age of exploration. They've had practice finding things. Let's talk sea denial in plain language. Amphibious assault isn't just put boat near land. It's a ballet of logistics with the ocean throwing elbows. Portugal's coastal hydrography features steep gradients and narrow shelves, meaning your approach lanes are predictable and surveilled. Surf conditions along much of the west coast are world famous for surfers. For landing craft, they're a rodeo. The south has calmer options, but those are watched, mapped, and bracketed. At best, you get a contested lodgement with defenders who don't have to annihilate you, just delay you. At worst, your expeditionary pride becomes a tied schedule. Air and missile threats. Portugal doesn't need to field a massive domestic missile shield when it's plugged into an alliance that does. What it does maintain is the ability to contest its own airspace, detect incursions along an enormous maritime frontier, and feed targeting data to partners who are very good at showing up fast. An invader counting on shock and awe faces distributed radar, passive sensors, and decoys sewn across terrain that makes looking low and slow a guessing game. If you want to fly nap of the earth up the Tagus, expect ground fire from units trained for that exact scenario. And drones? The defenders have most of the advantages: interior lines, short-range communications, and the ability to mass electronic warfare where you least want it. It's hard to keep control links stable while weaving through granite canyons and salt-scented fog. Strategically, an attack on Portugal is an attack on NATO's western anchor. There is no limited war scenario on the Iberian Peninsula that doesn't escalate immediately and horizontally. The Anglo-Portuguese alliance, the oldest still in force, doesn't need a romantic flourish in the treaty text to have teeth. The modern version is spelled out in Article 5. Add Spain's immediate stake, France's proximity, the UK's Atlantic fixation, and the US interest in the Azores and the Atlantic cables that thread through Portuguese territory, and you get a coalition response measured not in weeks, but in flight hours and steaming time. Quick side note, if your plan involves hoping NATO dithers, I invite you to read a tide chart. The only thing that moves faster than Alliance aircraft is the internet roasting your logistics on hour 6. Logistics, the part of war that ruins all the ego. Invading Portugal means sustaining a force across water or across a neighbour that absolutely won't let you. Every gallon of fuel, every pallet of ammunition, every spare part has to move through predictable corridors. Sea lanes that can be mined and patrolled, roads that can be cut by a single blown bridge, and ports that can be rendered useless with a crater in the wrong place. The defenders don't have to meet you toe-to-toe everywhere. They just have to break your rhythm. A day's delay at a river crossing compounds a week later on a dry dock schedule back home. Throw in targeted sabotage against key nodes, rail choke points into Spain, coastal pipelines, power substations near port cranes, and your decisive timetable becomes a series of apologetic memos. By the way, Portuguese grandmothers and their wooden spoons are not officially part of the order of battle, but I would not want to be on the receiving end of either. Economically and politically, the cost spirals. Portugal is not some isolated target. It's integrated into the European market, tied by law and finance to the broader West. Sanctions and countermeasures would slam into the invader before the first wave hits the beach. Maritime insurers will take one look at the coordinates and triple their rates. Merchant traffic will reroute around your fleet like it's a rock in a stream. And all the while, satellite eyes, European, American, commercial, are counting your ships, your trucks, and the number of sad camp chairs on your assembly area lawn. It's hard to win a propaganda war when locals are live streaming your stalled convoy on a serpentine hillside with captions like, "Shortest route," they said. Modernization? Portugal doesn't throw parades of cutting-edge prototypes. It invests where denial hurts the attacker most. Maritime domain awareness, coastal surveillance, special operations, and interoperability. The SIVICC Coastal Watch Network stitches radar, optics, and patrol craft into one picture. Maritime police and navy share that feed like a single organism. The Navy's submarines are strategic in a very specific way. They make your planner's pencil hesitate. Frigates with modern sensors and helicopters extend the detection bubble, while the Fuzileiros practice the unglamorous craft of making someone else's landing fatal. Air Force fighters, updated and lethal in the intercept role, form a ready wall over key corridors. None of that makes headlines like a new stealth jet, but all of it makes an amphibious commander sleep poorly.
And then there's the Portuguese way of war. Patience, resilience, and an almost cheerful ruthlessness in defense. This is a country that has practiced coalition warfare since the concept existed. It knows how to call friends, how to feed them, and how to let them do what they do best while it holds the crucial ground. It also knows its own terrain like family: forest tracks, cork oak groves, terraced vineyards, dry stone walls. The little features that never show up on satellite imagery become ambush sites and fallback lines. A hillside that looks like postcard agriculture at noon can be a fortified position at dusk. That village church on the hilltop, it's also a line-of-sight marker used by gunners since before your army existed. What about cyber and the cables? Portugal is a junction for transatlantic fiber, the arteries that keep economies alive. Those cables are under sovereign protection and allied concern, and any attempt to tamper with them would be a bright red flare to navies that take seabed warfare very seriously. Meanwhile, the national grid and port systems are tougher and more redundant than an invader would prefer. You can try to flick off the lights. The backup generators and manual workarounds will just put on a sweater and get on with it. Let's imagine, for the sake of argument, that an invader manages to establish a beachhead. There's a very narrow window where that presence has to expand or die. The defenders will compress, probe, and pound. Long-range fires from allies start walking in from the edges. A submarine kills a replenishment ship. A drone swarm cracks open your temporary pier. And all at once, you're across a river you cannot recross under fire. At that point, the problem isn't can we fight, it's which unit gets left behind while the rest withdraw. Napoleon famously discovered that Portugal doesn't chase, it erodes. Your army will learn the same lesson as its morale leans into the wind and asks why the sardines taste like salt, cordite, and regret. Armed neutrality is not the posture here, it's armed alliance. The moment a hostile force crosses Portugal's threshold, Europe's southwestern bastion becomes a test case for the credibility of everything the West says it believes in. And that's bad news for the attacker, because credibility in this neighborhood comes with fighter wings, frigate task groups, and logistics trains that start humming like a beehive. You won't be taking on a tidy country on a pretty coast. You'll be taking on a system wrapped around a coastline that hates you and a people who've practiced surviving worse. A few things should keep any would-be invader up at night. First, the sea state. It will ruin your plan on its own, and your plan probably deserved it. Second, the rivers and hills. They will split your force, choke your timetable, and feed you into historic killing grounds. Third, the islands. They watch you. They tell the Allies where you are. Fourth, the submarines. They are patient. They are quiet. They are the ocean's nope. Fifth, the cities. They rise in tears and hide a defender's grin. Sixth, the alliance. You don't get to choose how big this fight becomes. Now, because I promised a little levity in the middle of all this, yes, the Portuguese will offer you coffee before they defeat you. It will be strong enough to improve your marksmanship and your life choices. No, you cannot bribe your way through Lisbon traffic with a tank. That's what motorcycles are for. And if you try to pronounce Alcácer do Sal correctly on your first day, the locals will know you're not from around here and direct you to the nearest checkpoint with a smile. The conclusion writes itself, but let's give it the drama it deserves. Portugal is a country built like a fortress, defended like a family, and backed like a cause. Geography gives it walls of water and stone. History gives it a doctrine of denial that turns time into a weapon. Modern forces give it sharp teeth where an attacker least expects them. Allies give it depth beyond the horizon. Invading Portugal is not impossible in the mathematical sense. You can land, you can move, you can get your photo op. But victory, consolidation, a stable occupation, those aren't in the deck. If you attack, the coast will fight you, the rivers will fight you, the streets will fight you, the submarines you never see will fight you, and the flag still flying from a hill you thought you bypassed, that's the country. Still there, still patient, still unsurrendered. So if you're drawing up plans and thinking, maybe this is the easy one, close the map, take a breath, and listen to the Atlantic. It's laughing. The hills are laughing. History is laughing. And somewhere a grandmother is sharpening a wooden spoon. The better plan, the only plan, is to leave Portugal exactly as you found it. Uninvaded, unbowed, and standing at the ocean's edge like it always has, daring anyone to try.